Hello, we are here today to launch the book Monsoon as Method, Assembling Monsoonal Multiplicities, which is one of the outcomes of the Monsoon Assemblages project, which was funded by the European Research Council between 2016 and 2021. The book is published by Actar, a Barcelona-based publisher, whom I'd like to thank for the beautiful product they designed for us. Monsoon as Method is a collection of essays, drawings, maps, and photographs. After a foreword and an introduction, the book is structured in two parts. The first, titled Urban Assemblages, contains essays on Chennai, Dhaka, and Yangon. The second, titled Monsoonal Multiplicities, has 4 chapters, each containing a number of essays. The chapters are methodological framings, to begin with, containing essays on drawing, ethnography, space, time, and pedagogy. It is followed by matters and matterings, containing essays on atmosphere, air, the ocean, groundwater, salt, sediment, and plastic. This is followed by monsoonal infrastructures, with essays on bricks, canals, tanks, pipes, and pots. And finally, interspecies Intra-Locutions has essays on dragonflies, hilsa fish, jackfruit, snakes, and weeds. After the introduction to the book is a monsoonal glossary, and between the two parts is an insert of drawings and maps. The book was produced by Monsoon Assemblages researchers, all of whom are here today, except Beth Cullen, who could not be with us. I would like to acknowledge the enormous contribution she made to the project and to the book. We have organized the launch as a series of conversations between a MONAS researcher and a guest. Our guests are Karen Coelho from the Madras Institute of Development Studies, who wrote the foreword to the book and who will be in conversation with Anthony Powis. This is followed by Pamela Gupta of the Wits Institute of Social and Economic Research in Johannesburg, who will be in conversation with Harshavardhan Bhatt. Alfredo Ramirez Galindo, who leads the Landscape Urbanism program at the AA in London, will then be in conversation with me, followed by Ed Wall, who leads Landscape Architecture and Urbanism at the University of Greenwich, who will be in conversation with Christina Geros. Finally, Jonathan Kane of the University of Warwick, who also designed our exhibition website, will be in conversation with John Cook. Guests will begin each conversation by referring to, reading from, or commenting on a particular passage or drawing in the book by the author, followed by the author's response. If anyone from the audience would like to join in, please raise your hand or write your comments or questions in the chat. We would like to make this conversation as informal as possible and as long as time allows, for we would like to end this at 2:30 UK time. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Karen Coelho, who will begin her conversation with Anthony Powis.
Through ways of thinking it. I think that's a very good capture of what your of what your chapter is trying to convey. So perhaps you could again please explain what you mean by this, and then I have a couple more questions that I'll ask you after you've responded to me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karen. I'll try and keep it quite snappy, but just to give a bit of background to how I came to groundwater, I started my part of the Monsoon Assemblages project really broadly interested in Chennai and the way that very global phenomena of development meet the ground in particular places and in particular natures, and particularly in the context of the monsoon. So I was trying to find examples of this, and kind of where the two rub up against each other, the ambition of a global city and the problems of a real sticky natural condition. And in my early investigation, mostly through literature, reading your work amongst others, and many people in Chennai, groundwater just presented itself as something which offered me a way in, but also related those things of the constructed bits of the city to the kind of emergent or natural, and actually not only related those two, but really troubled the binary between them, because it was this material that just flowed through and really complicated that idea of a binary that I'd started with in this project. So whilst I guess the main focus on groundwater was that like many other pieces in the book, I was looking for a material through which I could start to read the monsoon, something that would ground it materially, but also spatially in the city. So I was reading through particular instances and narratives of groundwater, and that's where I really think of it as a register. So I was thinking about how the groundwater and the broader subterranean environment is a product of the city, and a product of as Lindsay writes in the introduction, the interactions between city and monsoon, and the way that each is made through the other. And you can kind of read that in groundwater as a form of archive. It's a form of archive that's shifting around and is never quite static, but you can take a sample that will evidence, say, an industrial process that might be 50 years old but happened in a certain place, or you can take a sample that evidences the rainfall of the day before, or the evidence is the sandy strata, or the evidence is the fact that your neighbor's been pumping their well way too much or something. Whatever it is, there's a kind of way to read through groundwater. And I guess that's what I mean by groundwater as a register. So it was my way in, essentially. And it seemed to me, even though it came up in conversations, it was somehow under-researched as a topic in itself. It was always there through everything, but didn't quite come to the surface, to use a bad pun. Your second question was about, knowledge and representation coming to the fore. So I had this sense when I started to work on the project that I was going to come in as an architect and figure out what was going on in the midst of all these conflicting ideas about what was happening in the subterranean environment, which in Chennai is very complex. But it didn't take me long to realize that I wasn't going to be able to do that. It wasn't a project of depicting something in truth, but actually engaging with the many ways and the many different people and knowledge systems that were coming at it from different perspectives. And so it became a project of thinking through the different ways in which groundwater is understood, but also, and another thing that Lindsay mentions in the introduction that was quite crucial for a lot of us in this project, I think, was the notion from Karen Barad that a material phenomena and an act of observation or a form of knowledge are not mutually exclusive, but remake each other through processes of interaction. So an experiment or a borehole or an event remakes the two. So I wasn't able to then think of groundwater as a kind of fact away from these different agencies of observation. So that became the focus rather than a kind of abstracted form of the material. And then the stakes of it became about thinking about what the agency of those different modes of representation were, but also the way that they establish hierarchies of forms of knowledge that are valid on a certain kind of municipal or political level, and other forms of knowledge that are less valid or less recognized or completely unrecognized. And so I tried to challenge the idea that there's a scientific form of knowledge or observation, and there's an embodied form of knowledge or observation that different people might have, by suggesting that all forms of knowledge are combinations of different apparatuses and embodiment. I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's great. We have time for a couple more questions, Lindsay. Quick ones. Yeah. Well,
I think so, Karen. Or we can, have another question and we can move on and maybe come back. Maybe that's a sort of better way of doing it. So why don't you go have another question and then we'll move on.
I think that well, I mean, another question I had was really about his drawing, but I think that I'm, if I try showing his drawing on a screen share, it's going to take a lot of time. It's a very beautiful drawing that he has, and I wanted him to talk a little bit more about it. But I'm going to skip that question then because it might take time. It doesn't really make a lot of sense if I don't show it. So I'll just ask you quickly to then what you think the lens of groundwater actually told you about Chennai and its relationship with the monsoon, to wrap up your.
I mean, I also come to this project as an architect, with the project sits in architecture, but not entirely. We're all coming from different disciplines. So I was, I guess, interested in the end what this meant for a kind of practices of city making. And I think that suggestion that groundwater is only a kind of through particular interactions and through a particular site in a particular way. The investigations that I did kind of meant that you couldn't just abstract and say this is what groundwater is. You can pull this practice from over there and put it down over there, and it will kind of operate in the same instrumental way. That the kind of practices of city making and have to be forms of negotiation. That relationship with the monsoon is always going to be a form of negotiation, and I won't kind of go too much into the wider Monsoon Assemblages thesis because I think that will come out, but it really brought home some of the things that we'd started with about the externality of a condition like the monsoon and practices of city making which were about defense versus practices of city making which were about a kind of cooperation and attunement with, for want of a better phrase.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I think we'll let it go at that. I think if we have a chance to show his picture at the end, that would be great.
It would be great too. Let's see if we can have time for that. That'd be lovely. Or I could just hold the book up. But why don't we give Pamela and Harsh the floor now?
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, great. Wonderful. First of all, it's a beautiful book. So it was such a pleasure to read it and look at it and feel it over the last few days. So it's much appreciated, and congratulations to the Monas team. So Harsh and I are going to be in conversation here. And he wrote two pieces for the collection. One called one is in the Matters and Mattering section, The Air of the Monsoon in Myth, Pause, and Story. And the second piece is in the Interspecies Intra-Locutions, The Stickiness of the Halasina Hanu, which is the jackfruit. So I just wanted to say the titles because of some of the words I'm going to play with. So I had sort of three areas of intervention that kind of link some of the conceptual framings of the book to your particular pieces. So again, just cut me off when we finish a question, and I can easily save the third for the later time. So I wanted to take Karen Coelho's beautiful point that cities are assembled within the monsoon. To have you talk a little bit about Delhi and the experience of Delhi, and you talk about it in your piece, sort of in terms of the smells, pollutions, rains, aerosols, heat, humidity, clouds. And I wanted you to just sort of assemble that for me to think about, and to take Lindsay's point, the monsoon as an open-ended gathering. So to situate Delhi within that, if you wanted to just respond to that in terms of what you're trying to say.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pamela, and for engaging with this work, and thanks, Lindsay, for bringing us all together. Yeah, I mean, this piece, the air piece was sort of an antithesis of a lot of things that my dissertation was doing, and in a way, one of the things it was asking whether a monsoon actually even exists. And so what would it mean to sort of question that? And it sort of offers an opening premise. So in a way, it was a bit of a reflective and contemplative post on some of the things I couldn't do with the other more formal pieces of engagement. I mean, for instance, my doctoral work was largely around stories. I mean, 3 stories of aerosols, an invasive plant, and the death of seasons as a narrative, as an idea. And so Delhi here really isn't primarily a sociological site. I mean, and I think there are huge areas of work. I mean, for instance, your own that engages with history and anthropology and some of those other disciplines. But instead, a lot of this work sort of picks up on these matters, and it follows how these matters entangle with the monsoon and how they confuse disciplines, and disciplines suddenly don't know what to do with themselves and with what they know and what they think they know something is. And so in a way, it sort of plays with that moment in asking for other possibilities. And so one of the things the air piece does is it sort of takes into question a question Shiv Vishwanathan asked me at a conversation in Delhi about, are you trying to create a myth, because South Asia is a spatial it's a space full of folks with a lot of myths. And so it is meant to be a provocation, and I sort of it took me to a couple of conclusions, and I mean so it was just a meandering. So sorry Pamela, tell me.
No, I'm just thinking my second question relates exactly to this point. So maybe I just go ahead and say that one, and that'll help you expand a little bit more. I wanted to think more largely about sort of monsoonal grammars or vocabularies and the ways in which epistemology and ontology, in the way that Karen suggests in her piece, about those blurring and then what's happening with this project. And I started to think then about thinking about the idea of myth, pause, and story and what those relationships are, and then to throw in stickiness from the second piece on the jackfruit, and to think about those as grammars, or thinking about the fruit, thinking about those as adding a vocabulary, enriching the vocabulary of the monsoons or grammars. So maybe you could play around with those ideas, and that idea of the myth was really provocative, and your answer to that question, and developing it through the piece itself.
Yeah, I mean, thanks. That's absolutely correct. And I think what I wanted to do with the jackfruit piece was to really, think of that moment where, I don't know, bless her soul, the grandmother is holding the jackfruit and tearing it apart with the katti. And I don't see a distinction between monsoonal grammar in the way the cut happens, in the way the jackfruit came into being, in relation, in the way the commodities. I mean, the jackfruit even becomes a commodity, and the jackfruit is given a space of shelter and fruit, and all of these other possibilities and things that are happening, both ontologically and epistemologically, and perhaps even antagonistically, and sometimes even undesirably. So really, there's an opportunity then for the monsoon to be de-technified, and really see how the monsoon is already so many different things, and therefore the monsoon has already been dissolved into grammar. And so because they had to find a way to synthesize the story of the state and extraction and a certain kind of planetary imagination into the monsoon, the jackfruit somehow allowed, I don't know, my humble sort of childish brain to just sort of, think a little more in a slightly more situated way, but also in terms of the stakes for love, the stakes for shelter, the stakes for sharing, which I think is the desire for monsoonal future, right? So I think, which allows for grammar to therefore unfold into something where we can come up with different grammars, and somehow they can all make sense, because the monsoon is atmosphere, and we're all breathing with an atmosphere.
Wonderful.
But thanks for that.
Yeah, if I can just actually end, because my third point was exactly where you moved, and then that way I won't have any questions left. So then we'll end my section. I wanted you to push to think about a theory of conviviality through the monsoon, and I was thinking that this love and this affect with the jackfruit and this moment of cutting it open and it's perfectly ripe, and what that does to think through the relationships, human, non-human, and weather, and aerosols, and all sorts of things, sensorial. And I wanted to just end with this beautiful point from Lindsay. So she said, for 5 years we thought, read, talked, walked, worked, ate, dreamt, and slept the monsoon. So I feel like some of that piece in particular on the jackfruit really sort of echoed that moment and that feeling and that affect. So thank you for that. So I don't know if you want to respond or we just leave it at that. So.
No, thank you so much for reading, and it's great to see you after such a long time. And yeah, it's I look forward to everybody else's comments and responses. And buy the book if you're watching, if you're listening, buy the book.
Definitely.
It's really a great reflection of some of the many conversations that happened over the years with the Monsoon Assemblages team. That Anthony and I had a PhD room on the top floor. Was it the 6th floor, Anthony? It was called the Ivory Tower because nobody would visit us. And it was also disconnected from the lift system. So the book is in a way like this really interesting assemblage of some of the many conversations and into things that you met as ideas, concepts, stories, journeys that people had and people found. And this book is sort of a collection that brings those many things together. And I hope you can enjoy some of them through the book. Thanks.
Thanks, Harsh. Thanks, Pamela. I just wanted to say to the audience, if you want to chip in, add anything, please do put your hand up. We'd like to really pass this backwards and forwards between us. And thanks for the plug on the book, Harsh. Okay, I'm now going to ask Alfredo to say a few things, and I think going to address a few questions to me.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay, and yeah, many thanks for the invitation. Great to be part of this conversation on the Monsoon Assemblages research. Well, the book and the website as well, which is part of this, is an amazing set of documents, and they show the incredible breadth of stories, knowledges, and practices, which are already impressive, and a well of resources of all kinds. And in the words of Lindsay, she mentioned Monsoon is as a method, offers a methodology for understanding the significance and consequences of the agential power of monsoonal dynamics within urban life and urban life within it. And I have to say, I have already bookmarked and placed a lot of the videos and cartographies and essays as part of my favorites. And I will certainly order a copy for the AA library because I already have mine. Well, I will get that from my visit from Westminster next week anyway. So given the short time we have, I thought that perhaps it would be better to address some more personal questions to Lindsay, her journey, given that she has written quite a few essays and the introduction of the book. But I thought as well that, well, if this is a public presentation as well, would be interesting for people and perhaps for young audiences to know how much has the Monsoon Assemblage research shaped your thinking, your writing, your practice, and your ways of being as an architect. I mean, my curiosity is like, has this been a radical transformation throughout these 5 years, or it has been, like a gradual evolution that expands your awareness of many of these concepts, or has it been, an expected outcome, of something that was already an investigation in waiting and a demonstration of some of the ideas that you had already in the past? I mean, that would be, great to hear from you and that experience.
Thanks, Alfredo. When I do a lecture on Monsoon's method, I actually always start in Johannesburg because I can kind of go back 20 years and see where the seeds of thinking evolved very slowly. Johannesburg is an inland city with no water anywhere near it. In fact, it sheds its waters to two oceans, to the Atlantic and to the Indian Ocean. And for me, when I located the city of Johannesburg, which I lived and worked in for 25 years, in relation to oceans, that was a transformative moment in my thinking. I then invented a project called the Folded Ocean, which sort of focused on the Indian Ocean as a kind of active space, shaping cities and islands around its shores. And it really was out of that Folded Ocean project that Monsoon Assemblages started to take shape. However, the experience of undertaking Monsoon Assemblages for 5 years with the particular amazing group of researchers who the project brought together, I think did fundamentally change the way I thought and worked. And here I think, and as I said earlier, it's a great pity Beth isn't with us today, but the kind of close collaboration with anthropological thinking and anthropological research that she brought to the team, as well as the incorporation of landscape architecture through Christina, and the incredible skills that John brought through his cartographic work and just the whole team fundamentally shifted the way I thought. And what do I mean by that? I started this project. The ERC proposal was actually a very modernist proposal. It was, here, let's see how globalization and the monsoon are disturbing one another, and let's find out ways to fix this. How naive can you be? Okay, but that's where the project started. And then slowly through this process of engagement in the field, engagement with each other, suddenly, we started to see that cities in monsoonal regions are far more entangled and the monsoon is far more entangled in them than any solutionism could ever hope to actually get close to. Yeah. So while it's been a long period, I think the experience of this team fundamentally changed how I worked, and I think maybe how we all worked actually.
Okay, that's great to hear, and perhaps linked to that, I was also curious to see how did you make compatible this research approach and method, no? That you're using, that you developed throughout these years with an official grant such as the European Research Council, no? Research, as traditionally understood, has been problematic, and you mentioned in one of your essays that you are aware of, the research as a colonial encounter and of destructive legacies and violence of the Western eye. But here, I see, there's a big push to transform the methods, by which you do research and operate, but you use an official channel. So what is your experience on this, and what were the hurdles, let's say, that you needed to overcome to achieve these outcomes?
Interesting question. Interesting question. The ERC, the European Research Council, as I think I mentioned in my introduction, is quite a remarkable funding agency. It's very rigorous to get the grant. They put you through a very, very rigorous process. But once you have the grant, because they call it, they fund research projects that no one else will fund. And they say that. They fund research that's too risky for any other research agency to fund, and they allow it to be open-ended. You don't have to go in with a formula, with a hypothesis that you're directly testing and you're coming up with kind of results which then have immediate impact. The ERC doesn't work like that. They know that research is risky. welcome emergent research, which ours was, and that your path changes as that you go along. So while it is an official European Union fund, it's actually a very unique one. And that's what enabled us to do the work that we did, to do this non-extractive, non-directly impactful kind of emergent research. So yeah, I think it was the particular funding organization that I applied to that enabled this to happen.
Thanks. Well, just let me know if when we are running out of time, I have more questions.
Maybe we should move on, and we can come back. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Alfredo.
Yeah, thanks.
Ed, it's your turn with Christina.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's fantastic to be here. And thank you for inviting me to be part of what I think is really one of the most important book launches we're going to have this year. I'd like to congratulate all the team. From the highlights of previous years, I've been attending many of the events that you've organised in London and getting to know in different ways the team that you brought together, who really are quite extraordinary. I troubled you, Lindsay, or maybe I didn't trouble you, but I sort of I forced on you my take on Monsoon Assemblages when we were in the Leatherby Gallery at the opening to Planetary Assemblages, sort of claiming Monsoon Assemblages as landscape research. And, you know, it's my background, so I'm going to make that claim. But I think that there is a quote from the introduction, which I think maybe ties together both sort of mine and Christina's experiences in landscape architecture, or at least in, say, dreaming of a better way of understanding landscape, where Lindsay, you quote, "Monsoon's method is a mode of inquiry into ways of, excuse me, ways the monsoon's liveliness comes about, is lived, loved, feared, and entangled in earthly substances, infrastructures, politics, and multi-species lives." I do feel that, let's say, the many of these aspects of the monsoon sort of have bubbled up through the different events and publications, the websites, the beautiful drawings that have been produced through the research. And maybe I start off by asking Christina sort of how Christina, how your practice has evolved through your experience in the project, and then I said maybe we can go into one or two questions about the particular chapters that you've authored. Sorry,
Christina, we can't hear you very well. You're very faint.
Okay, is it better? Okay, great.
That's better.
Great. I think most significantly, and I always really thought about landscape as a volumetric practice, not something that's horizontal or really working against surfaces. But the monsoon, I think, really spending time with the monsoon in this way really forced me to think about all of the many ways in which those volumes are opened up and really designed with. So we often, I think it's normal for us in design to think about the design of microclimates, whether it's in a building or in a landscape, but really thinking with the fact that we design weather large and small across at very local scales and entirely global scales. And the monsoon, I feel like there's no better medium through which to think how significant the little moves that we do in design really are, whether that's like spatial design or financial design or the many other ways that we construct like social and spatial relations with one another. And that has brought like a new dimension to how I think about my own practice, what I teach, how I work with space and relations. Yeah.
Thanks, Christina. I certainly think that I mean, such a long project comes to, let's say, impact the way we both see our fields as well as the way we practice. You wrote 4 chapters, Christina, which almost feels like a book in itself. I think that as many of the contributors have done, it really feels that it's the voices or your voice is very clear within the volume. And I think there's a chapter on atmospheres, oceans, salts, and canals, just probably to crudely summarize them. And in contrast to some of your other writing that has come out of the project, which I think some is on the website, and you wrote for a publication I was editing. This sort of drills down into some of the histories, which I found was really interesting. Each chapter is extremely focused. You know, the one around canals is fantastic sort of dissection of empire building. And what I quite enjoyed was actually reading all 4 chapters. This, while you do drill down, there are elements that connect the chapters quite explicitly, and it's not just the monsoon. I was wondering if you could talk maybe about some of those other entities. I'm thinking particularly, let's say, between the chapter on constructing canals and the one on salt taxes, how the colonial actions, political and economic decision makings really are ever present within the research.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think dealing with the monsoon, but specifically the South Asian monsoon, I felt sort of impossible to ignore, like the really deep, like, historical entanglements that they don't only undergird like our current reality, but they are our current reality. Like, it wasn't just India that was colonized, it was the monsoon that was colonized, and it remains colonized. And that, I think that was sort of the thing I was really grappling with and trying to sort of get through. I think what was really interesting to me in the different ways, like the canal infrastructure, which ultimately links to like insurance and financialization schemes of the monsoon.
Beautiful.
As well as the Great Hedge, right? This enormous landscape project that was used to dissect, to keep separate the products of these 2 monsoons, and then to control and manage populations through this. There were so many ways in which the monsoon was colonized and built into and out of, and with physical materials, with physical infrastructures that remain today. That when you start to look at those in that place, in these consistencies, and you think about how many canals are all over the world, right? And how many other gardens and parks of large scale exist all over the world, we actually can start to think about the ways in which weather has been colonized, whether it's a monsoon or not, all in so many different geographies and in so many different ways. And I think while those chapters, there is a strong kind of historical undercurrent in those, I was really, I think, pointing towards something else for all of us to think about in the way that the cities we inhabit now really are constructed.
Thank you, Christina. I appreciate the more than human background analysis. I'm going to steal another question before I hand over to Lindsay, back to Lindsay, which is around the relationship between the drawings and the texts. And I think that's being aware that you're involved in some of the drawings as well as some of the chapters. I was wondering if you could just comment briefly on the importance of the visual qualities of the book, because this is a stunning book. And when Lindsay emailed saying that she wasn't going to have time to drop the books off, I went round to her place and picked one up. You know, it is an exceptionally interesting book through the text, but the drawings, they deserve very, very close reading. And I was wondering if you could speak maybe later, John, and want to elaborate, but whether you could speak to the relationship between the text and the drawings.
Well, I think that when we start thinking about meteorological media as space within which we live, but also material that we design with, then we have to start rethinking the way we draw space, the way we draw sites. And I think that was something that really evolved throughout the project in many of the different drawings. There's different, probably only we can really see it, but there's like different stages of sort of learning or experimenting with different ways of representing something. So it really evolves over time, and then we come back to certain methods and different points, right? And I think it's something, like I know it is for me, and I think this is also true for John, but this project of really trying to rethink how we visualize the space of meteorology is like a project that I feel I'll continue for the rest of my practice, right? Like, and also knowing how complex it is and how many times we sort of thought and rethought and reworked a way of doing something really points to, I think, both how significant the question is, the problem is, and also how complex it is to think through. And so those, for me, drawing or imaging is something is part of how I research or part of how I think, like very much so. So those different kinds of drawings, or sometimes it was a video or something else, but all of those different things like really informed the way I was then thinking about the research. So the writing wouldn't exist in the way that it does without those drawings, and vice versa. And that definitely just comes from my background in design. I've never been anything else. So it's just part of how I think, yeah.
Thank you, Christina. I certainly think if we reflect on some of the problematic histories around sort of Western notions of landscape, that the drawings that you and colleagues have developed here, they certainly open up possibilities which I think really are quite groundbreaking, and I love the experimental sort of development of them. So congratulations. And I think anyone who has the book or is going to get the book, I think each drawing deserves a chapter length reading, so it's an hour for each drawing just to appreciate some of the complexities of the information that's being presented. I'm going to hand back to Lindsay. Thank you so much, Christina.
Thanks, Ed and Christina. Jonathan and John, it's your turn.
Yeah, this is perfect. It follows on directly from where we are, and we now segue sort of, I think, from the relationship between writing and drawing to the relationship between drawing and drawing. And John and I have had a chance to talk for more than a few years now about his drawings, and about, I've seen them in all kinds of formats. I've had the opportunity to design with them. So saw them recently in exhibition, printed out, huge scale, and now in the book. And the quote that I wanted to start with, John, is one that Lindsay quotes in her introduction from Hannah Knox's book, Thinking Like a Climate, where she says, in a climate changed world, anthropology had no special privilege to remain the same. And I want to replace the word anthropology, which I think is probably what Lindsay is doing, with drawing or with cartography or whatever your practice is, as you call it, and say that cartography or drawing has no special privilege to remain the same. Our representations and practices too will have to move with the carbon, the weather, and the computer models, and carry them into the practices of human world making and mold them into their parts. The drawing then becomes a contact zone for practices and ideas. And so, John, within that kind of framework where your drawing is not outside that is part of that contact zone. What exactly are your drawings, and what is it that you think that they do? Because they are so detailed and they are like so rich. Maybe you could tell us, what exactly are they, and do we call them drawings, or how do you think of them?
Yeah. No, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah. No, it's a very good question, and one that I think we've been thinking about over the years, and I perhaps won't be able to put it as eloquently as Christina, but I think well, I think what was quite nice about them, there's such a range of drawings in there, and I think actually sort of every team member has contributed to a series of drawings in their own way and brought their own kind of skill sets and things. And I think that's one of the nicer things when you kind of flick through there, is it's not just one hand or one style. And as Christina said, they're like an ongoing research process that's developing as we were kind of learning and things like that. So and I think, yeah, I mean, for in terms of what they are, like when I first started on the project, we were looking at the kind of subcontinental scale, and from that it was then moving down into the kind of 3 cities. And so I think for me they were a way of me entering the Monsoon or trying to understand what it was. And I think when I when I joined the project, well, we were kind of discussing in the office what are all the different environmental factors and kind of anthropogenic factors and all the things that kind of assemble together that would kind of generate and influence the monsoon. And my kind of opening task was to try and understand what those individual factors are, and how they changed over kind of space and time, and then what was the kind of material that you would use to kind of communicate these, and how, and so so that was the kind of starting point question for me, I think. And it was about like the initial research was like, so what these factors are, how are they measured and kind of quantified, what types of information does this produce, and then how do you use it? And that kind of set my trajectory for kind of research. So the drawings were a kind of research tool. And I guess on like a base level, they are a kind of assembly of different types of information that speak to particular factors. So this was kind of climatic data, satellite imagery, it was historic maps and photographs or fieldwork observations. And we've kind of chosen them, we've assembled them, and then we've digitized them. Or in the case of climatic data, we've kind of translated what is a giant numerical spreadsheet into colors, into gradients, into densities and notations and kind of symbols, and our kind of authorship is what those things look like, and what they, in trying to reveal particular connections and relationships between things. So I think that perhaps that answers some of the question, but really it's about the idea is that they were in constructing the drawing. That was kind of my research method, and that helped me understand kind of the area we were looking at and the kind of the factors and considerations. And I guess on that, like, because I mean, maybe my particular skill set was in using climate data, which is what a lot of the drawings at that scale kind of use. And I think what I found quite interesting about that was that when you use that information, you have to, from the beginning, you have to decide what expanse you're looking at, what scale you're looking at what height, what volume, or at what moment, or across kind of what time scale. And it's, I think, like embedded in that type of information, the fact that you have to make those decisions quite early in the construction of the drawing. So the kind of data that we were using in the end sort of fed back into the process of constructing the drawing. But I think, so the ambition, it was never to try and capture the monsoon in a still image, and it was not presenting data as kind of evidence or truth, but we were using data as like a medium, like you would paint or something like that, and translating that into imagery.
I agree. I think that it's this kind of non-representational attempt in a way, not to capture, but like to be with the monsoon. And I think that the drawings are, like, as it said, sort of groundbreaking. But I want to slightly trouble that and maybe open this up, and other people could also, maybe the others who've done drawings could perhaps respond to this. Further on in Lindsay's introduction, she talks about transcorporeality that troubles and dissolves the figure-ground relationship, an idea that is familiar to all architects, between bodies, environments, creatures, and the natural world, and transforms them. And I wonder if we, I mean, in a way, it's like a metaphor, dissolving the figure-ground relationship, but it is a way that we speak. It is that we talk about like groundbreaking cartography. And I wonder if you or Anthony and or Christina might, or even Lindsay, but we start with you, and then if there's others who want to talk about drawing, how is this groundbreaking, do you think, if we get to be literal about ground and figure and ground? It's a mean question.
Yeah, no, well, it's funny because having worked on this project for now 3 or 4 years and also been a student of Lindsay's before then for a number of years, I've actually forgotten really what a figure ground drawing was ever appropriate for. And so I find it quite hard to put myself back in the mindset of an architect that draws everything in a completely two-dimensional plane in either binary, black, white, solid void, or building void. And so, yeah, I don't know, when you kind of mentioned that earlier, I was like, actually, I can't quite remember the last time I would have thought of anything in that kind of sense. So it's quite difficult. I have to kind of, I don't know, reverse my education to try and remember what the point of that was in the first place.
Then maybe just to go on for that, the one other question I do have for you, and then we can open it up to other people if they want to ask. But you do teach with this, and I know a lot of you do, and I know that you and Ben Pollock have been following you using this method. How do you find that students respond? You teach it conceptually, but also technically. Maybe say 1 or 2 things about it as an educational method.
Yeah. Well, I think in some, well, and also this really kind of stems from Lindsay's teaching too, really. I think like using mapping and map making and maybe non-traditional drawing methods as a way of researching a particular site or subject material or a place, I think it's a very that kind of like research through doing is, I think students in our experience really kind of, they might not understand it at the very beginning, but they certainly do once they've produced drawings along those lines, or when they've been asked to think about landscapes or buildings, not just as the kind of figure ground solid kind of, but in all the other materials or factors or forces that kind of generate them, and thinking about them through time and sort of extending the scope of space. So I think those methods, I think, and heavily influenced by the time of Manas, I think they've really aided our kind of teaching practice and how you communicate that to students, and so it's been very successful in that respect.
Fantastic, thanks, John. Lindsay?
Right, thank you. I want to, at this point, ask if there's anybody from the audience who would like to say anything. If so, put your hand up or has a question to ask. Maybe while the audience is thinking, I can open it up to the floor here. Other members of the panel, would you like to respond to any of those questions? Possibly I can, Jonathan, to your question. I think, John, I think our drawings really are ways of situating ourselves in the weather. I often say this, and it kind of resonates with what Christina said. Most people's representational tools do is they allow you to draw the ground, and we don't only live on the ground, we live in the weather. So somehow I think the drawings for me were a way of trying to position ourselves within the weather, not as a thing, but as a dynamic sets of gradients, of thermodynamic intensities. So to start to unpack what we mean by the weather and what it means to live in the weather. I think that's what the drawings were an attempt to do. But I think there are many different kinds of drawings there. I mean, there are some quite conventional cartographies of cities in particular, but I think the drawings that we're referring to are the drawings of the monsoon, where we tried to actually explore the monsoon through drawing and by situating ourselves within it. Ed, you have your hand up.
I saw that no one else had the hand up, so I'm just gonna. I had a question I thought I might ask in the pub one day, but I'm going to ask it now, which is in the list of the and this relates to the drawings. In the descriptions for the drawings, there's a term which comes up a lot. So some of the drawings are called a speculative something, speculative section, a speculative, mostly sections. I was wondering if you could explain what speculative means in this sense, because it seems like we're describing two approaches to drawings, and I don't know whether that's just my reading, but I'm wondering whether it's a term which could be useful for some of our research students here who are working with data in ways which is not just representational.
Who would like to answer that? Christina, John?
Yeah, I'm sure John has plenty to say about this as well, but I think the use of that term speculative is really important for a couple reasons. One, I think there's an assumption that whenever data is used, particularly scientific data, that it is truth. Like it is absolute. It is a fact of a point in time, and that it is total. When in fact it is everything but that. Sensors have variability. The ways in which we see things are not. It's always through a kind of human construction of like a reference point or a set of reference points. So it's never actually. It's never actual. It's probably one way of saying it, and we also don't see or sense evenly the whole globe. So there's always, a matter of interpolation between data points. Sometimes that interpolation is a short distance and a short set of jumps, and sometimes it's actually very far. And so all of those drawings that are done with data, we're still speculating on what the interpolations between each of those data sets means. So we're just experimenting with a set of forecasts or predictions or assumptions or speculations about what the weather or what the climate actually is. So I think that's one way in which it's really important to make sure that we understand that drawing with data is always speculative. And I think weather forecasts have gotten better, but I remember as a child that actually the weather forecast was like a light suggestion of what the weather might be, right? So even 20 years ago or something, like the accuracy of a weather forecast was not what it is today. And I think that the fact that we're really still very much in this active process of figuring out what weather is and how to read it and how to determine it is also something that comes through in this work. I'm sure others have plenty to add to that.
If I could add as well, I think that's entirely right, and I think that it reveals itself even more in a sectional drawing than a plan-based one. I found, and I think that is because even with satellites and some of those instruments, even the data itself is always gathered, really, apart from certain satellites, is gathered in plan. So even atmospheric information is at particular sort of plan sliced levels, and I think when we sort of forced ourselves to draw in section, you kind of, it reveals usually the layering which disappears in plan is much more apparent in section, and I think it becomes more obvious that you are speculating in the relations between those different layers of information when viewed in that way. Or seemingly, I think maybe the deeper you go, the less accurate the information becomes, or the more speculative the kind of information it becomes. And so I think particularly on those sections, yeah, I think they are more kind of speculations.
Thank you both.
Can I suggest, Karen, that we look at Anthony's drawing now, which is a very different kind of drawing from the other drawings in the book, mainly because it's the only hand-drawn drawing in the book. Could you share your screen? I think we have time. The share screen is right up at the top of the screen. We can't hear you.
I'm not so familiar with Teams, so I'm working it out right now.
Up at the top, there's a rectangle that says
square box
share.
with an arrow
Yeah,
pointing
square box.
upwards.
Hold on. Oh yeah, I can see one. Yes.
Oh, brilliant.
Okay. And there we go. That's the one I want. Can you see this?
Now you have to minimize your.
Yes, we can. That's yes. So if you just
Yeah, there we go.
maximize
Fantastic.
that screen.
Good.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
There we go.
So yeah, this is it's lovely because it's Anthony's sort of I guess imaginative reconstruction of a sort of set of relationships underground. And I just, again, just wanted him to talk about how he put this together from overground, and what are the, just have him talk us through the speculations that are going on in this picture.
Thanks so much. It feels like a privilege to have mine on screen, where we've just been talking about all of John and Christina and Tom's drawings that are in the book. But that's really kind of you, Karen, to bring it up. It's a kind of playful drawing. I think I'm going to steal John's phrase as well when he said he was trying not to draw the monsoon or something similar. Yeah. I was just trying not to draw, or trying not to try to draw groundwater in this picture, but using a lot of the conventions of the kinds of illustrations that I was reading, that I was also talking to people about in relation to their representational practices, taking representation to be quite a broad thing, including things like hydrogeological modeling and other forms of prediction, I guess. So if the word speculation that it's asked about means guesswork, it also means a kind of mirroring or a lensing of something. And I like that, because then there has to be a mirror or a lens that does the work of speculating. And so this is also a kind of way of me implicating myself by having a go and saying that whilst I am interested and quite critical in a generous way about all the different forms of representation that different disciplines produce about groundwater, then I'll also try and I'll let myself be part of that, because it's really just different ways of approaching something that you can't, well, you literally can't see in this case, because it's under the ground. And I do a couple of things with this drawing which are sort of tricky, like it doesn't have a ground line. The ground is sort of pushed up into the middle of the frame, rather than most architects sitting it kind of below and not really thinking about what it is. So it's foregrounding, and it's really a kind of description of the project. So it has a tunnel, it has the underground tanks, it has the wells, it has the channels, it has the different types of strata, it has porosity, it has the fractures in rock, and it just kind of collects all these things into a slightly fanciful image that's quite personal, I guess.
Great.
The three-dimensionality of groundwater is, in a way, I feel this suggests that.
That's really nice to hear.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Anthony. Karen, you now have to unshare your screen using that same rectangle. Yeah.
Oh, I hit
Thank
stop
you.
presenting.
Yay. Fantastic.
Did it? Oh, did it
Yeah.
do it? Oh, great. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Good. Okay. Are there any other points people wish to make? Harsh.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I don't write in the book, but I've written elsewhere. And maybe also a way in for folks watching, or I don't know. I mean, a way into the drawings, at least for me, is that the monsoon is actually not a widely drawn visual commodity beyond its spectacle from the weather office, right? I mean, so as a technical tool for visual representation from the weather office, the monsoon really is, at least from the positionality of much of our research. I mean, we were based in London. During this project, is that the monsoon is largely an exotic form, and it doesn't really encompass the planetary. So in a way, the idea of the planetary envelopes the monsoon, but really the monsoon is literally the same thing as the global color line. The monsoon is the same thing as the global tropical line, the global palm line, the global north, the minority world, and the global south, the world. So I think what a way in for me in terms of thinking about speculation and the drawings is that if there is such thing as the global monsoon, it is also a spatiality and history of science with those points in land which depict the failure for a possibility of meteorology, and therefore the many other things that sub-meteorologies like tropical meteorology in South Asia, West Africa, East Africa, Latin America do in order to survive in a world that is drawn by meteorology and that is embedded with it, both fiscally and in terms of the everyday, I mean, from taxation to agriculture. So to draw the monsoon, therefore, is a way, in a way that is not simply meteorological data representation, is by itself a very powerful act of theory production, because there is a scarcity of this type of knowledge in validating that many kinds of worlds and fights and practices and possibilities exist within aka the monsoon. So it sort of it produces a presence for that place where the mathematics of fluid dynamics collapses, and I'm happy to expand on that at some other forum at some other time. But that's why we don't have accurate weather, and so it's impossible. It's an insolvable problem, and so we're sort of stuck to it. And so in a way, what does it mean to draw a global system that is made legible to technoscience, but really sort of multiply it and expose its its entanglements with other processes and sense making ways.
Great, Harsh. That's fantastic. I mean, I think I wrote somewhere that the drawings are a way of ungrounding the monsoon. In other words, kind of grappling with its instability and its unpredictability rather than grounding it as fact, which kind of resonates with your input. Yeah. Alfredo, did you want to add anything?
Yes, perhaps. I mean, I have a general question, which is in relation to the language that is used in the book. I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, for example, interactions. No, for me, I mean, perhaps you guys are more used to this language because you have read the literature. Perhaps, as you mentioned, a lot of influence from anthropologists, etc. But I found it very interesting, the introduction, no, of these new words, let's say, at least for me, interactions, intra-locutions. And I was wondering if you can, reflect on, the relevance of this, like the introduction of words explains things that otherwise would fall short, within the understanding of the monsoon, as we discussing it, something entangled, something that needs to be understood within and not as an externality. So how do you see that? And also, how it's relevant for this to communicate, to audiences, to people, in order to get the message across?
Who would like to answer that? Any hands up? Otherwise, I'll have a go. Alfredo, the language we used was really, really important for this project. And we did draw a lot on feminist scholars, material feminist scholarship, on Donna Haraway, on various other writers for whom words have become extremely important. Hyphens have become important. Nature culture is one word, as a way of kind of dislodging the kind of binary thinking that we are still so trapped within. So, interaction is a word that Karen Barad invents, as is the word space-time matterings as one word, which I found extraordinarily powerful as an idea, in order to try to kind of get at the sort of the dynamic kind of interrelationships that we were coming up upon, but then also at getting at the fact that we were caught up in those interactions. Intra-Locution is a word that we invented, the idea that our research developed through conversations and knowledge didn't exist outside of those conversations. I think for me, that's one of the key theoretical contributions that Monsoon Assemblages makes to this project. It's an anti-colonial idea. It's kind of says that there are these conversational modes of knowledge production in which we're all implicated, we're not apart from. So I think the language is extremely important as a way of trying to convey what we were doing. I don't know if other people have things to add. Pamela, you have your hand up. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I just actually had a question. I sort of reading through the book, it struck me one, we could talk about the photographs, which we haven't discussed, and the relationship to the drawings, as well as John's beautiful glossary, which we haven't discussed really either, and the relationship of image and text there. And then I was also struck by the sort of palette and the color palette of the book itself, which is quite muted and beautiful. And if someone wanted to speak to sort of all of those aesthetic aspects of the book project. So I leave it open-ended, really.
I'd like somebody else to answer. Maybe Christina, you'd like to address some of that. We especially made a decision to include very few photographs in the book. We have hundreds and thousands of photographs, but it was in order to kind of give the text space to talk. And the photographs that are there are quite carefully chosen in relation to some key moments in the text. They are a way of not illustrating the text, but of embodying the text, I think, of exemplifying the ideas. On the muted tones, perhaps John could speak to that. John has a very particular color palette. And in fact, Christina invented a color palette for Monas when she joined the project. And we used that color palette throughout the project. Perhaps you talk about the color palette a little bit, Christina, because that was your invention.
Yeah, I don't know how much, how special it is to talk about in some ways. It came from, there were a lot of photographs taken, particularly from that first trip when I first joined in Chennai, of these monsoonal storms rolling in over the Bay of Bengal. And so the color palette was really just taken from that. It has it feels very stormy to me, actually, but also calming. Like there's nothing scary about it. It's not a doomsday palette. It's also not overtly architectural, which I think I did sort of intentionally want to move away from the kind of black and white drawing style that architects typically evoke, as well as the use of really bright, you know, the kind of like red to draw attention to a thing. So I think using that palette was really just came from what felt like the mood of the monsoon itself, and then trying to use that to draw with, which I think, yeah, John and I just kind of continued throughout. And it worked well because most of our photographs and videos like also had that same language, because it came from the same thing, yeah.
Could I just add before John takes over? You know, the other thing, I don't know if any of you have read Stefan Helmreich's beautiful piece in the book called Saturation, in which he does an analysis of the saturated colors of climate change maps, you know, the red to the blue, and these ghastly kind of very, very primary colored saturations of imagery of climate and climate change. And that was a kind of reason for this much more muted, much more, you know, colors that are drawn from the photographs in order to challenge that very saturated image making, which is associated with drawings of climate these days. John, would you like to add to that and talk about the glossary a little bit, I think?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I'm terrible at choosing colours, so I was very glad that Christina had kind of created a palette for us based off some of the photographs, and it did. But I think when we were kind of immersed in all this and all the video footage and the photographs of all these different kind of environments and the field trips we took, I think like, yeah, that it all kind of matched and developed in a. And then there's certain like personal preferences on kind of muted or maybe a lack of bravery in color choices from my point sometimes. But yeah, I think a lot of it was material driven. I think, yeah, and so they kind of work well together. I think like some of, if I could, there's some of the drawings I did for Beth in Dhaka, particularly to do with the garment industry and things like that, I think became, towards the end of the project, maybe I was able to better select colors which related to some of the materials we were dealing with. And from a personal point of view, I found those also like quite successful in different ways. And maybe there's a more systematic way of doing it. I don't know. I've been thinking about it a lot recently, but yeah, it was really kind of Christina's foundations and generated from the fieldwork. In terms of the glossary, well, this was a bit of a labour of love over about a month, I think, of kind of painstaking diagram producing. But no, I think it was we had a piece of paper going for probably about 5 years of all these terms that we came across and things that we realised that I think we took for granted, but other people wouldn't know what they are. And so it was always in the to-do list really to kind of, yeah, create this glossary, but for both the website and the book, just because when you've been talking about barometric pressure for 3 years, you suddenly realize it's kind of meaningless to other people. So, and that was quite I don't know, it was a good exercise trying to work out how you can depict those in a 2x2 centimeter little thumbnail, but hopefully it's kind of a useful tool for the book, but also maybe just a nice thing to kind of flick through as well.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Pamela. Anybody else? I think we're getting to the end now, but is anybody in the audience or from the panel got anything they'd like to add? Nope. Good. Just to say that we have, the book is for sale from Actar's website, or it is now also on Amazon UK and USA. The publishers have assured me that they're going to try and find a distributor in India to be able to get the book to Southeast Asia for not such a prohibitive price. They've done this before with 2 other books that they've published, which have been on Indian subjects. So just watch social media, and I hopefully will be able to let people know when it's available, either on global Amazon or through an Indian distributor. and I will bring some to Chennai when I come in July. For those of you who don't know, I've been successful in a follow-up grant to work with Karen and her partner Niti and some other people in order to take this work further on a very specific site in North Chennai, when we'll actually really be thinking at a much more local scale, in a very cosmopolitical kind of project with the fishing folk in the Ennore Creek in North Chennai. So this is really a way of thinking these principles and these ideas through at a much more precise scale. And we also have a project called Climate cartography, which is going to take the mapping techniques developed further with 4 clients. Okay, but I think I'll call it a day now. I seem to be echoing. I'm sorry if that's the case. Thank you to the Monsoon researchers. Thank you so much to our panel, to our guests. It's been a great discussion, and we hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.